All right, so at this point, we've talked about how DAX can be used in two different places: calculated columns and measures, both implicit and explicit. At this point, I want to take a big step back and compare the two. The reason it's worth focusing on this is that you'll find many situations where you could use either option. So it's important to understand the similarities and differences so that you know what your best choice might be. Now, starting with calculated columns, these are evaluated in the context of each row of the table to which they belong. In other words, they have row context. Second, they actually append static values or attributes to each row in the table and stores them with the model, so that increases the file size. Third, they're only recalculated on data source refresh or when you make changes to component columns, meaning columns that are actually included in the calculation that you're making. And then finally, these are primarily used as rows, columns, slicers, or filters in your pivot table. So, quick visual recap: these calculated columns actually live in tables. They're stamped into each row, and you should really only use these in the rows, columns, slicers, or filter section of your pivot table field list, not for values. Now, one quick caveat here: it's not illegal to drag calculated columns into the values area of a pivot. It will let you do that, but generally speaking, it will be more efficient to accomplish the same thing with a measure. So on the other side, we've got measures. Measures are evaluated in the context of each cell of the pivot table in which they're displayed. In other words, they have that filter context that we've been talking about. They don't create new data in the tables themselves, therefore they don't have any impact on your file size. They're recalculated constantly in response to any change that you make to your pivot table view or layout. And you have to use measures in the pivot table value section. You actually can't place them anywhere else. So, quick recap: measures actually live as part of your pivot table, and they can only be used in that values box. So hopefully this will be a helpful little guide for you to remind you the differences between calculated columns and DAX measures.